Now, in other news, United Nations inspectors have concluded that chemical weapons were used in an attack near the Syrian capital Damascus last month. Presenting the report to the Security Council, the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said almost all the samples tested showed that sarin gas was used. Mr. Ban said the use of such weapons was a war crime and demanded the threat of sanctions to back a plan to destroy Syria's chemical arsenal.
The report of the United Nations mission to investigate allegations of the use of chemical weapons in Syria has concluded that chemical weapons were used on a relatively large scale in the Ghouta area of Damascus on August 21st, causing numerous casualties, particularly among civilians. This morning, I submitted a missions report to the Security Council and the member state of the United Nations. We have also posted it online for all the world to see. The team of experts led by Professor Åke Sällström deserves high praise. They faced dangerous circumstances, including a sniper attack. They did their job in record time while upholding the highest professional and scientific standards. Working with experts from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, and the World Health Organization, WHO, they showed the United Nations at its best. The report makes for chilling reading. The team gathered testimony from survivors, medical personnel, and first responders. They collected biomedical evidence and dozens of soil and environmental samples. The mission has provided the world with an impartial and independent account. The results are overwhelming and indisputable. 85% of the blood samples tested positive for sarin. A majority of the environmental samples confirmed the use of sarin.
That, of course, was the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon. Well, with me now is Dr. Alexander Coker. He's a former Chief Inspector with the UN Chemical Weapons Group in Iraq. Thank you very much for joining us on BBC News this evening. Obviously, your speciality is very much the science of this. Just talk to us, take us through the points that you thought were particularly interesting in the Weapons Inspector's report.
The most interesting thing is that they found sarin itself, which is unusual. I would have thought that they would only have found the degradation products. Because sarin it's very volatile, it evaporates very quickly, especially in a hot country like Syria. To actually find it several days, about a week afterwards, in multiple of samples is a very strong evidence. It's not like they found indicators, they found sarin itself. They found indicators too. They found the degradation products, they found byproducts, they found synthesis, things that can be produced while it's being made. But they also found sarin, which is pretty, you can't dispute that then.
Yes, and why do you think they found the sarin itself after quite a number of days had elapsed? What can explain that?
If it's not windy during this climate period, so wind would help it to evaporate. So if it's not windy, there's not much rain, so water would help it to degrade into something else. And obviously, quite a lot's been used. So if there's quite a lot, it's going to take longer and longer to go, and it can hide underneath things. And some of these things were found in, I don't know, you would have to have used quite a bit, and the climate conditions were good to keep it there.
The report also says the team was also able to examine impacted and exploded surface-to-surface rockets that are capable of carrying a chemical payload. I mean, the number of samples and pieces of evidence that were taken away, that number was huge, actually, more than many other UN investigations. So it's been a very comprehensive and thorough investigation, given the circumstances in which the inspectors went into Syria.
Well, just to qualify that, it's huge for this type of inspection where they have limited time periods. But I mean, we've taken in Iraq many more samples than from that, but we weren't under any time constraints. So that's what they mean, like a special mission like this, that's why. But there have been more than that. But the payload, the type of rocket, yeah, it's like a 122mm rocket or a bit smaller than that. But it's normal, yeah.
And that particular sort of surface-to-surface munition, does that, to your mind, suggest where the munitions, where the sarin gas may have come from? Who might have been responsible?
Because it's weaponized, it would suggest that it's a military. But I don't think it's beyond the capability of a well-organized group to weaponize. It's difficult, but they could have support. I'm sure that the Syrians themselves would have had help in developing these weapons as well. I mean,
I just want to ask you about the future involvement of weapons inspectors and the UN in Syria. Obviously, it very much looks as though they'll be back there quite soon to try to begin this process of putting Syria's chemical weapons into international control. How difficult do you think the task is going to be?
The initial task is not difficult because they're going to tell them what they have. So they just have to go there and destroy those weapons. I mean, you could do that by decontamination, but because there's so many of them, we'll probably use an incineration. But after that, if somebody is saying, have they told you everything, the next step is a little bit more tricky because then you have to rely on intelligence agencies giving you information. You need overhead imagery. You need to understand how the Syrians have done this. So if you go to the facility and it's well protected, it's ventilated, there's lots of systems that indicate safety. Usually, if they've done that one place, they're going to do it everywhere. If it's shabby, there's not much care to the safety, then you've got a very difficult task. But so it depends. First of all, they have to just take what they're given. They'll understand the process better, and they'll understand how it's being stored and the facilities. From that, they've got one step. Probably, the Syrians have imported most of this equipment from the West or from other nations. I doubt they could have manufactured all this stuff themselves. And probably a lot of the precursors. So you can get that information. You can get some of the information from those Western companies, and they will tell you quantities of how much they sent and stuff. So that can help you as well. But it's not going to be an easy task for the second stage.
Well, that, I suppose, is a conversation for another day. For the moment, Dr. Alexander Coker, former UN weapons inspector in Iraq. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, the headlines for you on BBC News.